This is my high mileage 2011 Hyundai i30 diesel, about 115 horsepower. I got this from the dealer. It was a pre-registered car, 327 miles on the clock. Today it's got 296,000 miles. If you're thinking of buying an i30, bear in mind this has got a Euro 4 diesel, so it's not ULEZ compliant. The road tax is £35 a year. If you decided you wanted the estate version, just bear in mind that the road tax for that is more like £160 a year. So let's just take a look inside. So this is the comfort trim level. So in the back you've got ISOFIX fixings on the outer seats for kiddie seats. The seat backs are split, 2 seats, 1 seat, and the front seat squabs also pull out and swing forwards, so you can make the floor flatter. Inside, this being the comfort level trim, we have a leather bound steering wheel, which is still in pretty good nick, but it started to flake off in places. You have a leather gear knob. You have controls for the audio on the steering wheel. You get a AM, FM radio and a CD player, manual air conditioning. There's a little cubby hole here you can keep bits. An auxiliary power socket, cigarette lighter. You can plug an iPod in. These parts are for the Bluetooth hands-free phone system. When I first got this as a company car, they insisted that we had a hands-free system professionally installed. There's also a phone holder for my very old Nokia phone that I don't have anymore. But it was easier just to leave that in rather than take it out. You have electric windows on all 4 doors. Electrically operated door mirrors. There you have the buttons for the instrument illumination, the electronic stability program which you can turn on and off, and the headlight level adjustment. If you opt for the cheaper classic version, you don't get the leather bound steering wheel or gear knob, you don't get these controls, and you only have electric windows on the front. And for the diesel is only 90 horsepower, so it's a little lethargic, and you only get steel wheels as well. So whilst the car was under warranty, I had it dealer serviced, so for about the first 5 years and up to about 110,000 miles. And then I sold it to a friend and they decided they didn't want to pay dealer rates, so I've been responsible for virtually all of the maintenance since then. So if I talk about how much maintenance costs, that's just the cost of the parts. Obviously I haven't included anything for my labour. So just starting at the back. So this is the boot. We have a space saver, spare tyre and the toolkit. There's a spare auxiliary drive belt in there. And there's the detachable tow bar. I had a tow bar fitted, but because of the location of the number plate, it's mandatory to have a tow bar that's detachable. So that's a Witter tow bar, which I fitted. I've got it second hand for about £75. So on the tailgate, the only things I've had to do is 2 things. One is replace the rear wiper motor, and that I had to replace that when the vehicle had done about 240,000 miles. I got a second hand one off eBay for £20. One thing I had to do was I actually had to saw off this shaft because I couldn't pull the wiper blade off the motor, so I had to saw through the shaft, replace the motor, and then knock out the bit of shaft out of the wiper arm so I could refit it. So it's probably worth mentioning that it's every now and again just pulling these wiper arms off just to make sure they don't see solid. The blades, rear wiper blades, I've replaced those 3 times. They cost about £6 or £7. Very easy to fit. Not sure why anyone ever pays a dealer to replace them. And the other issue I've had is with the rear washer, and that was when the rear washer didn't work. And what I found was there is underneath the roof lining, under here, there's a little non-return valve, and that was just not letting the water through. So I unscrewed the valve, took out the spring inside and the little piston, and then it was working again. I'm not sure what the valve does because it always seemed to work just fine. Turn to the rear axle. Right, let's have a look. So we've got 16-inch alloy wheels. So the rear discs I've replaced 4 times, and I've just fitted new discs. You can see on there it's still even got the coating on the disc. So they're Borg and Beck discs. They were £35 for both sides. The rear pads I've replaced 4 times. So the pads that are in now, I replaced those in February at 10,000 miles ago. They're Delphi, 25 quid. I've replaced the brake shoes because for the handbrake there are brake shoes inside a drum that's part of the brake disc. So I replaced those once at 145,000 miles. They were about 20 quid. I did check them when I fitted the disc, so they're still fine. I also replaced the fitting kit. That's the springs that are within the handbrake mechanism. They cost about £9.11 from Delphi. On this wheel I also replaced the backing plate, which is starting to rust away, so I replaced that. That was £27. I've replaced the caliper slider pins on the other side of the car. They were £12.45. And I also replaced a little lever on the other side, the one that actually works the handbrake. That was just falling to pieces. I replaced that in June 2021 at 219,000 miles. That cost me about, well, almost £16. I've also replaced the rear shockers on the rear axle, so they were £74 for a pair. That was in July 2018 at 151,000 miles. So they're Monroe shock absorbers. Okay, just talking about tyres. This car's had 20 new tyres in total, so that's 5 sets of tyres plus the originals. Normally I fit good quality tyres, so these are all Goodyear efficient grip performance, which today cost, they're about £80 each. Normally I fit them 2 at a time, so when the front tyres wear down, I move the rear tyres to the front and get the new tyres fitted on the rear. I also had to replace the locking wheel nut key, but I managed to buy that directly from McGard. That was €16, so as long as you have the little piece of paper that tells you what the key number is that came with the car, you can get a key direct from McGard. On the rear doors I've had to do nothing apart from replace the door lock on this rear passenger side door, and I replaced that in June this year. That cost me 30 quid from eBay, a second hand one. So the problem I had here was that the door it would start to not unlock. So you just couldn't get the door open because it's deadlocked, so you cannot use the levers within the door to open the door. And it stopped working, and then it started working again, so I forgot about it, and then it stopped working again, and Then when it finally started working again, I decided I'd better fix it, because if the door's actually shut, you just cannot get to these screws that you need to remove the door lock, or even this internal door card. So you really are stuck if you cannot get the door open at all. So if you do start getting these problems, it's probably a good idea to take the door card off and unplug the door lock when it's in the open position, and then you can use the controls inside the car to actually keep the door locked. But obviously it won't work with a remote locking, but it's better to be able to open it than to have it shut and then just not be able to open it at all, because I really don't know what you would do if it was permanently locked shut, unless you had to basically just cut the door off to get at it. On the front axles, I've replaced the front discs 4 times. The latest set have been on since February at 287,000 miles. They are Delphi, £69 a pair. The front pads I've replaced 5 times. They were replaced in January at 286,000 miles, and they're Ica pads at £26. I've replaced the front glide pins on both sides. That was done in March 22 at 237 miles, £21. Front springs replaced. I had to replace them in January, February 21 because one of them broke. So that was at 210,000 miles. They cost me £77 for both sides. I've replaced the front drop links twice. So they connect the anti-roll bar to the front strut, and you can hear them start to knock when they wear, whenever you go over bumps. So the first ones I replaced were in August 2019 at 180,000 miles. That cost me £37. And then I replaced one of them in March 23 at 262,000 miles. I actually bought a pair of Delphi drop links for £12, so I still have one of those because I only replaced one of them. Front ball joints, I replaced those in November 2017 at 130,000 miles. That cost me 110 quid, but I had to get a mechanic in the garage to actually replace them because they actually screw in with a very big 50mm hexagon, and you really need an impact driver to get those out, and I didn't have one, so he did it. So the parts and his labour was £110. On this side, on the near side, I had to replace the front wheel bearing, and I did have one replaced under warranty when it was only about a year old. So on this side it started to rumble. That was replaced in September of last year, 278,000 miles. So as well as replacing the bearing itself, I replaced the lower ball joint again, the ABS sensor and the rubber bumper in the strut, the little rebound bumper. So the whole lot cost me £111, which included the labour because, again, I had to get my mechanic to extract the bearing. I took the hub assembly off, but I had to take it to him to get the actual bearing out because it needed a press to get it out, and he needed to apply a lot of heat to actually get the bearing off the axle. On this side, I had to replace the track rod end this year in January, 286,000 miles. That cost me 20 quid. I needed to replace that for the MOT. And in March 22, we had the front and the rear wheel alignment done. That was a special offer, 50 quid, but now we did have a problem with the rear tyres wearing on the inner edge, but since we've had the rear tracking done, they've been fine. They wear nice and evenly. Okay, so looking inside the engine bay, I've just talked about oil and filter changes. While the car was under warranty and dealer service, they only did it every 20,000 miles, which is what the service interval is. But since about 110,000 miles, I've been changing the oil myself at sort of between 10 and 13,000 mile intervals, depending on how it fits in with the car being used. So on average, an oil change costs me about £23 for the oil and the filter. I only use a high quality full synthetic i30 C3 oil, and the filters I use a variety, either Marley or Hengst or Man, but Marley is what Hyundai uses, and I know that because I went and bought an oil filter from the dealer and opened the box and it was a Marley filter. So I last changed this in January at 286,000 miles. Air filter, I change that once a year. That's an easy thing. So I changed that in January. So that's a Hengst filter under there. Easy to do, just undo the clips and off it comes. The cabin filter, which is underneath, accessible from the glove box inside the car, I replaced that in January. That's a Bosch filter. £11.63. The fuel filter is sat back here. I've replaced that 3 times, and I've just replaced that in, I've replaced that in June at, well, it hasn't moved since I replaced it. So that's an i30 filter, £16. Again, i30 is what Hyundai use as a replacement filter. What next? Gearbox oil change. That should be changed every 90,000 miles. I've done it a couple of times, but when I had the clutch replaced at 245,000 miles in July 22, obviously the mechanic would have refilled the gearbox oil then, so it's not due for another 40,000 miles or so. Auxiliary drive belt, which is down here. I've replaced that a couple of times. The belt that's on now is a Daco belt. That cost me about 10 quid. And I replaced that in July 2019 at 177,000 miles. But I do check it to make sure the teeth aren't starting to break up. What else? The battery, it's had 3 new batteries. This battery was fitted in January, just 10,000 miles ago, and that's got a 3-year warranty. So that's good to go. That was a £55 battery. The air conditioning, I had to get that regassed in April 2016, just before the warranty expired, and I took it to the dealers and they actually found that the condenser was leaking, so they replaced that under warranty, but I had to pay £60 for the regassing. And just as a note, it is the old refrigerant, so the price of regassing the aircon is half what it is for cars with the new refrigerant. But it's still working fine. Big ticket item, the clutch was replaced in July 2022. That was about £660. That was done at 245,000 miles. So it's the whole clutch and the slave cylinder as well. I've done another video on the clutch, so just to see what state it was. So that was a replacement clutch. One thing to note about these cars is that they don't have a dual mass flywheel, so that's a big cost saving, because 1, they're more likely to fail, and 2, they're expensive to fit. even though the clutch is already quite expensive. Alternator. I replaced the alternator, which is tucked away down there. So that was replaced in September 2022, 249,000 miles. So a reconditioned alternator, that cost me £95. I've also replaced the engine mount. So I replaced the front engine mount, which is buried down there, and there's another engine mount under here which connects the gearbox to the actual chassis. The guy that did the clutch pointed out that they were starting to perish, so both of those cost me £75. Coolant flush and refill, I did that in February 21 at 210,000 miles. That cost me about £25 in coolant, but also buying the demineralised water that I use to flush out the system. And that's it in the engine bay. Everything else, nothing else has been changed. All the original injectors, EGR valve, DPF, turbo is all original. If I haven't mentioned it, it's still the original equipment. Okay, just on miscellaneous things, I've replaced the front wiper blades about 3 times. The last time was in April 22 at 240,000 miles, and a pair of these Bosch Aero Twin cost about £21. Dead easy to fit. Key fobs, I've had to replace the actual key cases because the buttons wore through. But we do have I've just replaced the batteries in both of these fobs, so they both work. Lock, unlock. So the batteries last quite a long time. Inside the key there's also a little transducer chip that is sensed by a coil within the ignition lock, so you must have that transducer chip fitted. If you change the key case, you have to move the chip into the new case, otherwise the car won't start. If you unlock the car and don't open the door within a certain time, it will relock itself. Things like bulbs. In the early days I did have a session where the headlamp bulbs would fail, probably once every 6 months. That's the dipped headlamp bulb. But not difficult to replace, you just have to pull the headlamp unit out to get round the back. But since I started using some Osram ultralife bulbs, the bulbs seem to last now. Or that could be the fact that I've replaced the alternator, but I don't think I've changed the headlamp bulb for a couple of years now. So I'll just have another look around the car. So it's been extremely reliable, and it's needed every day for work. If you don't have a car to get to work, you don't earn any money. So I think it's only ever had about 3 call-outs for breakdowns. One was when I had the car, when the battery packed up, so I had to get them to come out and start it. And I drove straight to the motor factors, picked up a new battery, and then fitted it. Another time was when somebody actually broke into the car. They actually smashed this window. There's a little nub there where they tried to break in. So they did go in and stole the dash cam and the sat nav. So then the car had to be recovered home. Another time was a call out for when my friend left the interior light on at the airport for a whole week, so the battery was flat. They had to get someone to come out and start the car again. The other time was when the alternator packed up, and again they had to get the car recovered then. So they're the only times it's broken down. It spent very little time in the workshop. Probably the longest time was when it went in to have the clutch done, which took the guy 3 or 4 days. But that was a time when my friend was away on holiday, so the car, you know, we could stand that delay in getting it fixed. Apart from that, it's hardly ever been off the road, and I mean, even since it's MOT in January, it's done another 10,000 miles. Oh, the MOT runs out in January. If I just start the car up, put it in neutral, and so it's got the low fuel light on. There's the mileage, 296,309. Yeah, still runs fine. It's never ever had the check engine light on. It just runs and runs and runs. After reviewing the video I did yesterday, I realised I hadn't mentioned the scrapes down the left-hand side. So we have a scrape here on the crease on the front wing, and there's a scrape along the door and the rear door. It also extends through onto the rear quarter just there. And this was caused by another driver that just pulled out into our lane without noticing we were there. And although it was their fault, we didn't get it repaired because I think the insurance company would have just written the car off, and then what would we have done with whatever the settlement figure was? Because if you go out and buy a similar car, you just don't know the history of it. You don't know whether it's been looked after. And of course, we just spent nearly £700 in getting the clutch done. So we chose not to pursue the claim because the car still drives fine. It's gone through 2 MOTs with those scrapes on. It doesn't affect how it drives. Another thing I forgot to mention, or I got wrong, was I talked about on the key fob, it has a transducer chip inside. Of course, I got that wrong. What I should have said is it's got a transponder chip inside. Some of the things this car doesn't have, it doesn't have automatic tyre pressure monitoring system, which means you don't have to worry about the cost of replacing the valves when the battery runs out. There's no cam belt to change because it's got a chain, and as long as you replace the oil regularly with the right oil, it should last, well, pretty much the life of the car. So that's it. Thank you. One thing I do if I'm considering buying a second-hand car is to look through its MOT history, because it usually gives you a good idea of whether the car's been looked after. So this car passed in January. It failed on the front track rod end, which I replaced, and they also commented that tyres were getting low on tread. 2023 it passed, no advisories. 21 it passed with no advisories, but I did have to replace that front coil spring. 2019 pass, they mentioned the tyre wear. 2018 pass, no advisories. 2017 pass. This is where they picked up on the ball joint boots as an advisory. So this is when I had the front ball joints replaced. They commented on tyre wear. Normally I will wait for it to go through the MOT before replacing tyres if they comment on them, but it wasn't my car at that time, so it's not my decision as to when to spend money on tyres. 2016 passed no advisories, 2015 passed no advisories, 2014 this was its first MOT and they failed it on one of the tyres having cords exposed. This was actually at the dealers, they did the MOT, and I wasn't there to look at the tyres, so I'm not sure how accurate that was. I just have to take their word for it. But now, before I take the car for an MOT, I always check the state of the tyres first.